Glowbringer-Invasion. Arden's silhouette cut through the morning mist that hugged the ground of the village's lone training field. His fiery red hair, a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the surrounding hills, flicked with each calculated motion of his sword. The steel sang as it sliced through the air, an anthem to his dreams of valor and adventure. The village, a tapestry of thatched roofs and cobblestone paths, lay cradled in the valley's gentle embrace. It was a place where time meandered like the winding river at its edge, indifferent to the world beyond. Children played in the fields, their laughter as much a part of the landscape as the cawing of crows or the rustle of leaves. Elders sat outside their homes, sharing stories and wisdom as old as the stones beneath their feet. But Arden saw none of this. His eyes were on distant horizons, his mind on tales where heroes triumphed and their names became immortal. Each morning he rose with the sun, his routine unchanging. Practice, refine, and imagine. He wielded his wooden practice sword with a grace that belied his humble beginnings. No master had taught him. He was self-taught, his skill honed by sheer will and an unquenchable thirst for something greater than what lay before him. The villagers watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern. They admired his dedication, but worried for his heart that seemed out of place in their simple world. Arden, they'd say, shaking their heads as they tended to their crops or mended their nets, the boy with fire in his veins. "Arden," called out old Merrick, leaning on his broom as he swept his front step clear of autumn leaves. "You planning to cut down an army of shadows?" With a flourish, Arden brought his sword to rest and flashed Merrick a grin that held more warmth than the rising sun. "Just preparing for when I won't be fighting shadows anymore." Merrick chuckled and returned to his task, watching Arden resume his dance with an invisible foe. The boy moved with purpose, each step a challenge to fate itself. And so Arden remained, a beacon of restless spirit in a sea of contentment, unaware that destiny had already begun to weave its tapestry around him. The sky, once a clear canvas of blue, darkened as a sinister hum pierced the morning calm. Arden's grip tightened around the hilt of his wooden sword, eyes lifting to trace the source of the disturbance. A deafening screech rent the air, sending a flock of birds bursting from the trees in a panic. Villagers spilled from their homes like ants from a disturbed nest, their faces etched with confusion and terror. Arden stepped forward, his chest heaving with each breath as he witnessed the harbinger of chaos. A metallic object, jagged and foreboding, cleaved through the sky. Flames licked its underbelly as it descended with unnatural precision toward the village green. The ground shuddered on impact, throwing Arden off balance. He regained his footing just in time to see the hatch of the craft open like the maw of some great beast. From within spilled figures tall and angular, their bodies encased in chitinous armor that gleamed under the sun. Their eyes glowed a haunting purple, betraying no emotion, no mercy. One by one they raised their weapon-sleek devices that hummed with an energy that made Arden's skin crawl. A bolt of light screamed across the space between invader and villager, striking a nearby tree, which exploded into splinters. Cries of horror filled the air as the villagers scrambled in every direction, seeking refuge from the relentless assault. The Glowbringers, as the villagers would soon know them as, advanced, methodical in their destruction. Arden's muscles locked in place as he watched this nightmare unfold. He had always longed for adventure, for a challenge beyond these simple fields and quiet hills. But this was beyond comprehension. A child's cry snapped his gaze to a young girl standing frozen near the smouldering remains of what had been her home. A Glowbringer turned toward her, its weapon lifting in slow motion. For an instant, Arden's world narrowed to the point of that glowing barrel and the petrified child in its path. The years spent swinging his sword at phantoms felt laughably insignificant now. What good was a wooden blade against such monstrous technology? Yet as cold fear threatened to root him to the spot, something deep within Arden stirred a fierce protectiveness he had never known he possessed. His feet moved before his mind caught up, propelling him toward the child. Arden's dash across the field blurred the chaos into streaks of terror and flashes of light. His wooden sword, now a pitiful excuse for a weapon, seemed to weigh him down with its futility. He neared the girl, her sobs cutting through the cacophony like a beacon of innocence about to be extinguished. A figure emerged from the fray, a blur of motion and resolve. Elder Merrick, with his leathered skin pulled tight over high cheekbones, appeared beside the girl, as if conjured from the smoke. His hand shot out, pushing her away from the deadly aim of the Glowbringer. She stumbled backward, tripping over debris but finding safety in the sudden distance. The blast intended for her seared the earth where she'd stood moments before, sending up a cloud of dirt and ash. Arden arrived at Merrick's side, his breath ragged. "We need to move!" Merrick's command cut him off, as much an order as it was advice. With surprising agility for his age, Merrick dove at the Glowbringer. Arden followed suit, his fear now a comet tailing behind his burgeoning courage. They collided with the armored invader in a tangle of limbs and wills. The Glowbringer buckled under their combined weight, but did not yield easily. Its strength was otherworldly. Arden grappled with the weapon in the creature's grip, fingers prying against an alien sleekness that seemed to resist his every effort. With a guttural cry that came from somewhere deep within his core, he wrenched it free. Merrick's voice pierced the struggle. "This way!" Together they turned on their heels, Merrick leading with a limping gait that spoke of old wounds and battles long forgotten. Arden clutched the stolen weapon like a lifeline as they navigated through the destruction. Behind them, cries of defiance rose from other villagers emboldened by their act. Arden dared a glance back to see others rallying, a blacksmith wielding his hammer with grim determination, women armed with kitchen knives, even children throwing stones with trembling hands. Merrick hauled him around a corner into an alley shrouded in shadow and relative quiet. "Keep your head down," Merrick panted, leaning against a wall for support. "And stay close." Arden nodded, his grip on the weapon unyielding despite his shaking hands. They had survived for now, but survival was only the first step in what promised to be a relentless dance with death. The narrow alley swallowed Arden and Merrick, offering a fleeting veil from the onslaught. They panted in unison, backs pressed against the cold stone wall, their chests heaving like bellows stoking a fire. A sharp clang echoed in the distance, the sound of metal on metal followed by a villager's battle cry. A desperate guttural sound that spoke of final stands and last breaths. The cry drilled into Arden's core, igniting a flame that fear had smothered. With a sudden burst, Arden broke from Merrick's side and surged back into the fray. He zigzagged between smoking ruins and charred earth, closing in on another armored figure that loomed over a fallen comrade. This Glowbringer wielded a weapon unlike any forged in the village, an elongated barrel of polished obsidian that gleamed with malice. It hummed with energy, its tip crackling with a light that hungered for destruction. Arden's charge went unnoticed until the final moment. With a grunt, he launched himself at the creature, knocking the weapon skyward. It discharged wildly into the air, a cacophony of sound and fury, as lightning sizzled and fire burst forth in an indiscriminate arc. The Glowbringer recoiled, its form momentarily disrupted by the unexpected assault. Arden's hands scrambled across the fallen weapon, fingers tracing unfamiliar grooves and ridges until they closed around its handle, a handle unnervingly organic to touch, pulsating as if it held a heartbeat. The weight of it felt oddly balanced in his grip, as if it were an extension of his arm rather than an alien artifact. His mind raced with uncertainty, but his body moved with an unfamiliar surety. He raised the weapon, pointed its ominous tip at the recovering Glowbringer. A silent plea for forgiveness whispered through his thoughts just before he pulled what he assumed was the trigger, a small protrusion that yielded to his touch like ripe fruit. The weapon roared to life in his hands, spitting out a beam of violet light that carved through the air with precision. It struck the Glowbringer squarely in its armored chest, and for a moment time seemed to halt as a look of surprise etched itself across its obscured visage. Then it erupted, into nothingness, a cloud of dust where once stood an enemy. Silence enveloped Arden as he stood there, weapon still raised, smoke curling from its tip like a dragon's contented exhale. Merrick's eyes widened as he watched the dust settle where the Glowbringer once stood. He strode over to Arden, his gaze fixed on the humming weapon still smoking in Arden's grasp. "Never thought I'd see one of those things up close," Merrick muttered, his voice a mix of awe and dread. "They say the Glowbringers eat stars for breakfast. Couldn't fathom they'd turn their appetite to us." Arden's hand tightened around the weapon's handle. the foreign texture beneath his fingers, now a grim reminder of what they faced. "How do you know about these?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the chaos that had unfolded around them. Merrick kicked at a piece of rubble, sending it skittering across the ground. "Old tales mostly, but I've seen scraps of metal with their symbols in black markets in other kingdoms." He paused, glancing at the fallen weapon once more. Never knew they held such power. In the days that followed, Arden found himself at the center of a storm he never sought but refused to escape from. The villagers who had managed to overwhelm and disarm a few Glowbringers passed their plundered weapons to those willing to wield them. Each dawn brought with it a chorus of whirs and clicks as Arden practiced with the captured technology, learning its secrets, its strengths. Each dusk found him surrounded by those who sought to stand with him, a collection of souls bound by loss and fueled by defiance. Among them was a blacksmith named Thorn, his hands more accustomed to hammer and anvil than alien weaponry, yet there he stood each day, coaxing secrets from metal not born of earth. "The weapons," Thorn grumbled one afternoon as he adjusted something within the casing of a weapon. "They're more than just tools of war. They're alive in some way, reactive." He glanced up at Arden with eyes that had seen the glow of countless forges. "But I reckon we can make 'em sing our tune." The villagers watched, hearts pounding in their chests like drumbeats calling them to battle. They gathered around Arden and his makeshift cadre, farmers and veterans alike, wielding weapons that hummed with unfamiliar energy. "We stand together," Arden called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Not as soldiers, but as a resistance to these monsters that have destroyed our home." Nods rippled through the crowd like waves cresting in agreement, a silent pact made under the shadow of invasion. As twilight approached, their numbers swelled. Their determination took shape in the form of patrols and plans whispered between allies who moments ago had been strangers united by circumstance. And there, in the heart of the survivors' camp, an unlikely hero stood among them, not born from legend but forged from necessity, a beacon of the resistance in an hour most dark. Under the waning light, the resistance huddled in the forest's embrace, their whispers blending with the rustle of leaves. Maps etched with roots and scribbled notes sprawled across a makeshift table of crates and barrels. "Remember, these walls have stood for centuries," Arden pointed at the faded parchment. "Their strength is now their weakness. They won't expect an assault from the cliffside." Thorn leaned in, his finger tracing the jagged line representing the steep ascent. "It'll be a hard climb, but we've got enough grapnels and rope to outfit 2 teams. Merrick rubbed his chin, eyes narrowed in thought. "And once we're atop, we'll need to move fast. We can't give him a chance to regroup." The group nodded in silent agreement, each face etched with determination and the weight of impending battle. A young scout named Ilara stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the castle's layout. "The eastern tower, that's our entry point. It's the least guarded according to our scouts." Arden met her eyes, respect evident in his nod. "Ilara's right. We hit them there and secure a foothold inside." Night cloaked their movements as they departed from their encampment, a ghostly procession threading through the forest's dense underbrush. The sound of clinking gear was muffled by careful hands, and soft-soled boots left but faint impressions on the mossy floor. At the base of the cliffside, they split into teams as planned. Grapnels soared through the air, finding purchase on unseen ledges above. The resistance began their ascent, muscles straining against both gravity and time. As they crested the ridge, Merrick peered over with caution, signaling the all-clear. The eastern tower loomed before them, a silent sentinel bathed in starlight. They regrouped at its base, catching hurried breaths as Thorn distributed tools to pry open an entryway. A sudden gasp cut through their preparations. It was Ilara with a spyglass pressed to her eye. She passed it to Arden without a word. He looked through the lens and his breath caught inside his chest. It was a sea of Glowbringers swarmed within the castle grounds, like shadows come to life. "They're more than we ever imagined," Arden whispered, his voice barely audible over pounding hearts and shuffling feet. Thorn exchanged a glance with Merrick before addressing Arden. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." Merrick's lips pressed into a thin line as he clutched his stolen weapon tighter. Easy was never part of the plan. Arden's hand closed around the grip of the alien weapon. a sleek monstrosity of unknown metal that hummed with a life of its own. The Glowbringers swarmed within the castle grounds, their forms an amalgamation of shadow and malice. Thorn had described them as wraiths cloaked in darkness, but now, under the siege of starlight, they appeared even more sinister. The team moved with purpose, each member synchronizing their steps with the heartbeat of the night. Ilara slid a slender blade from her sheath, its edge catching the faint light as she pressed her back against the cold stone of the eastern tower. "Keep tight," Merrick murmured, eyes scanning for any hint of movement on the battlements above. Arden nodded and motioned toward the tower's entry. With a series of deft movements, Thorn worked his tools into the crevices around a heavy wooden door. Wood groaned in protest as it gave way, revealing the dimly lit corridor within. The resistance slipped inside like a breath drawn in silence. The interior was cool and still, an eerie calm before the storm of conflict they were about to unleash. "Split and flank," Arden commanded in a hushed tone, leading half the group down a shadowed hallway. Merrick and Thorn took point with the others, disappearing around a bend with stealth that belied their urgency. A low growl echoed through the stone passages, a Glowbringer on patrol. Arden raised his weapon, finger grazing over controls he had learned to operate through necessity rather than understanding. The device vibrated with power as he aimed. A figure emerged from around the corner, a blur of motion and malice. Arden squeezed the trigger, a bolt of searing light shot forth, striking the creature in its chest. It let out a pained screech that ended as abruptly as it began, its body dissipating into ash, carried away by an unseen wind. The resistance pressed on, their footsteps a soft patter against stone floors worn smooth by centuries of use. Arden led his team deeper into the labyrinthine fortress, each corner turned, bringing them closer to their objective, the central keep where their intelligence suggested the Glowbringers' command resided. At last, they reached an ornate door carved with symbols that twisted the eye and mind. Ilara stepped forward to examine it when a chilling sensation prickled at Arden's nape. He turned just in time to see another patrol rounding upon them, larger than any they had faced before. Without hesitation, he raised his weapon again, but this time he knew one shot would not suffice. His heart hammered against his ribs as he braced for what would surely be their most harrowing encounter yet. The resistance fighters held their breath, a collective stillness settling over them as the larger Glowbringer patrol materialized from the shadows. Arden's weapon, still thrumming with latent energy, seemed a feeble defense against the swelling tide of adversaries. Ilara crouched, her eyes narrowing as she gauged the distance between them and the oncoming threat. She whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound in the heavy air. "Two flanks, staggered formation." Merrick nodded, calm resolution in his eyes as if he had done this 1,000 times. He peeled off to the right, moving with a dancer's grace despite the armor hugging his frame. Thorn mirrored the action to the left, tools in hand already replaced by a pair of short-barreled alien weapons designed for close quarters, modifications done by Thorn himself. The Glowbringers advanced, their forms shimmering like heat over pavement. The lead creature raised an arm, appendages tipped with claws that looked capable of rending steel. Arden fired. A streak of incandescent fury pierced the gloom and found its mark. The creature stumbled but did not fall. Its brethren surged forward undeterred. Ilara sprung from her position, blade singing through the air as she met the nearest wraith in combat. Her weapon found chinks in ethereal armor, each strike precise and lethal. Merrick unleashed a thunderous volley, shots punctuating the silence with their explosive retort. The hallway filled with acrid smoke and the pungent odor of singed otherworldliness. Thorn backed into a defensive stance beside Arden. "Door!" he shouted over the cacophony of battle. Without hesitation, Arden pivoted on his heel to cover Thorn's back. As he worked feverishly on the intricate lock mechanism, a puzzle only his deft fingers could hope to solve amidst chaos. A sharp clang resonated as Merrick's back collided with the stone wall. He grunted, shoving a Glowbringer off with a boot to its midsection before firing another round point-blank into its formless face. Ilara's blade danced in an arc too swift for eyes to follow, cleaving through another adversary. She moved like water flowing around rocks, inevitable and unstoppable. The lock clicked open under Thorn's ministrations, just as Merrick dispatched his foe with a final shot that echoed like thunder in an empty sky. Arden called out, "Now!" and they poured through the door into the central keep. The chamber beyond was vast and bathed in an eerie glow emanating from devices of alien design, technology that hummed with potential and power. The Resistance members spread out within this heart of darkness-turned sanctuary, each taking up positions to defend their hard-won prize. The room held consoles lined with incomprehensible symbols and screens depicting star charts, foreign yet oddly familiar. Merrick leaned heavily against one such console, his breathing ragged but triumphant. "I think that may be the last of them." Elara wiped her blade clean on her trousers before sheathing it once more. She surveyed their new fortress with eyes that had seen too much, yet still flickered with an unquenchable fire. "This seems to be where they were working, why they are here," she stated firmly. Thorn ran his hands over one of the consoles with reverence mixed with awe. "What is all of this?" he murmured almost to himself. Arden stood at the center of it all, a commander beholding the dawn of hope for their resistance. They had taken the castle and secured not only a fortified base, but also access to more alien technology that could very well turn the tide in their war for survival. And so they stood within walls that had once echoed with despair, but now resounded with possibility. The Resistance had claimed victory this day. Arden's transformation, from a mere survivor to a leader with the countenance of carved granite, unfolded within the stone walls of their newfound fortress. His days began before dawn broke, and he would already be among the villagers, demonstrating the intricate mechanisms of alien weaponry. His movements, methodical and precise, were a language in themselves. Villagers encircled him, eyes fixed on the way his fingers manipulated triggers and adjusted settings that were once arcane. There was no room for hesitation, no allowance for error. Each movement was an essential verse in the hymn of their survival. The castle grounds echoed with the staccato rhythm of alien blasters, being fired at makeshift targets, their pulsating energy carving craters into thick walls that had withstood sieges of a different age. Arden's commands cut through the din, clear, concise, each word hammering home the importance of discipline. News of their victory rippled across the land like a stone skipping across calm waters. It brought with it a tide of new faces, each set with determination, ready to join a cause that now seemed imbued with hope. The once hollow halls filled with the bustle of an army in the making. Blacksmiths adapted alien metals to craft armor, while medics studied extraterrestrial first aid kits to mend human wounds. Yet as their numbers swelled, so did their visibility. The castle, perched atop its promontory like an unblinking sentinel, drew eyes that glowed with otherworldly malice. It was not long before the distant horizon quivered with the approach of a force more formidable than any before. The sky turned a molten hue as dawn crept over the battlefield, the alien horde advancing like a relentless tide against the castle's formidable bulwark. The air thrummed with the resonance of energy weapons charging, the makeshift army's stance unyielding, each soldier's grip on their salvaged armaments betraying neither tremor nor doubt. Arden stood at the forefront, his gaze fixed on the encroaching swarm. "Brace!" he bellowed, his voice ricocheting off stone battlements. The defenders tightened their ranks, a mosaic of human resolve set against the otherworldly onslaught. A volley of brilliant bolts arced from the castle walls, meeting the horde with a fury that turned night into day. The ground shook as alien bodies crumpled under the barrage, their own return fire splashing against ancient masonry and newly forged shields. "Push them back! Hold your ground!" Arden's command was both a beacon and a rallying cry as he dispatched one enemy after another with lethal precision. The clashing forces met in a crescendo of violence. Alien warriors, lithe and merciless, slipped through cracks in the human defense, only to be met with the cold embrace of medieval steel or obliterated by concentrated blasts from scavenged weapons. In the thick of battle, Arden spotted him, the Glowbringers captain. Towering above his kin, clad in armor that refracted light into dazzling patterns, he moved with an authority that commanded attention. Arden motioned to a handful of his most trusted fighters. Eyes locked on their target, they began cutting a path through the chaos. "Stay close, aim for the joints!" Arden's strategy was swift and silent as they neared their quarry. The alien commander turned, sensing the approach of worthy adversaries. His movements were fluid, an elegant dance of death as he dispatched 2 human warriors with an effortless swipe of his energy blade. A weapon Arden hadn't seen the Glowbringers use until now. Arden engaged him directly, firing blast after blast into the ornate armor of the captain, seeming to stagger him. "Keep pressing, he can't last!" Arden's voice barely rose above the cacophony, but it spurred his team onward. Arden, sensing a fracture in the captain's poise, pressed harder, weaving between beams of deadly light. The captain, confident in his armor's resilience, underestimated the ferocity of Arden's resolve. A misstep, a rare moment of alien uncertainty, and Arden seized his chance. With a calculated feint, he drew the captain forward, only to sidestep and send him crashing to the ground with a powerful kick that reverberated through the air. The captain lay there, dazed beneath the weight of his own battle gear. Arden loomed over him, blaster raised, a conduit of human defiance against an otherworldly oppressor. Without a word, he fired into the reflective visor of the captain's helmet. The crackling energy found its mark, and the light that once danced across the alien's armor faded into stillness. A hush fell over the nearest combatants as they witnessed their leader's triumph. It was short-lived, the silence shattered by renewed vigor among the human ranks and panic among the Glowbringers. With their captain fallen, cohesion unraveled. The remaining aliens attempted to retreat in disarray, their synchrony lost amidst fear and confusion. Human warriors leapt into action with relentless tenacity. Swords clashed with retreating figures. Blaster fire lit up those who tried to slip away into the encroaching dawn. One by one, the Glowbringers fell, struck down as they turned their backs to flee. Arden stood tall amid the carnage, his eyes scanning for any sign of alien movement. He knew this victory was but a moment in an enduring struggle. They must capitalize on their advantage. "Form scouting teams," he commanded, his voice cutting through the post-battle stillness. "Search and destroy, leave no stragglers." Pairs of soldiers fanned out from the castle gates like ripples across a pond. They moved with purpose, through fields littered with debris and fallen foes, their senses attuned to any hint of alien presence that dared linger on this battlefield turned grave. In the aftermath of victory, the scent of charred earth mingled with the sharp tang of spilled ichor. The survivors combed through the debris, a grim ballet choreographed by necessity. Merrick, his armor dented and smeared with the residue of battle, lifted a fallen beam with the aid of a few fellow survivors. Underneath lay remnants of both human and alien, their final struggle frozen in time. Thorn sifted through scattered weaponry with a practiced eye. His hands, steady as the ground beneath, picked up a pulsing alien sidearm, its energy core still intact. He dismantled it, piece by piece, salvaging what might turn the tide in battles yet to come. Ilara. She had not returned from her scouting mission. Her absence was a void they all felt keenly. Then he saw it. Arden found her prized blade amongst the rubble, scorched from plasma and covered in Glowbringer remains, a testament to her final moments. Arden's eyes lingered on the blade, his jaw set against the swell of loss and tears that threatened to overtake him. He tucked it in his belt and turned back to his people. The shared grief was palpable, a collective weight that bore down on each survivor who knew her. They gathered their dead with reverence and efficiency, laying friends and foes alike to rest beneath a sky streaked with the colors of an uneasy dawn. Arden knelt beside Ilara's fallen form, her eyes closed as if in peaceful slumber, her features untouched by the savagery that had claimed her life. A pang of sorrow gripped Arden's heart as he held her. "Find your way home," he whispered, his voice a hushed tribute to her bravery. Hers was a true loss to Arden, one that would retch his mind in the quiet moments the rest of his days. As they stood in silent vigil, an electric pulse ran through the air. Every head turned skyward, every ear tuned to the crackle of incoming alien craft breaking through the atmosphere, heralds of doom that fractured the brief respite. Their intent was clear. Reinforcements for the Glowbringers were imminent. Arden rose to his feet, casting a long look at those who remained, their faces etched with fatigue and resolve. "Ready yourselves," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "This war is far from over." They dispersed without ceremony, each person a cog in a machine hastily assembled from desperation and determination. They fortified their positions and checked their armaments, preparing for another onslaught. Arden climbed to the highest rampart, where he could survey all that lay before him, the battered stronghold, the scarred land, and beyond that, an uncertain horizon where danger brewed like a gathering storm. As he stood sentinel over what remained of their world, he felt it, the thrumming pulse of engines tearing through space-time, growing louder with each passing second. The battle was won. Now another chapter awaited its pages unwritten and its outcome hanging in balance like a blade poised above them all.